Welcome to your Advanced Taxation course with BPP Professional Education. This short clip is designed to introduce the Advanced Taxation paper to you to give you a little bit more of an idea about the exam that you have signed up to sit. Let's start by having a look at what is on the Advanced Taxation syllabus. And this slide gives you an overview of the Advanced Taxation syllabus. You can see that it's separated into 4 areas: A, B, C and D. Interestingly, syllabus area A contains all the technical knowledge that you need to be a successful student. It says, apply further knowledge and understanding of the UK tax system through the study of more advanced topics within the taxes studied previously and the study of stamp taxes. So when you look at the syllabus in more detail, this is essentially where it says that you need to understand the different taxes applicable within the United Kingdom. Now, what this will include is all the taxes that you had studied in your earlier taxation exam. So let's think about that. That's your income tax, your capital gains tax, your inheritance tax, national insurance, VAT and corporation tax. Now, everything that is assumed knowledge from your earlier exam, or if you were exempt from that earlier exam, it is still assumed knowledge for you. All of that is definitely still examinable within Advanced Taxation, but what you'll find as you look through the material on this course is that we will pick up all of those taxes and we will study them in more complex detail. So you will see that as you go through the course material. Now, that of course is getting more depth on taxes which should already be familiar to you. What it's pointing out to you is that there is an extra tax that you did not see in your earlier studies, being stamp taxes, which is an extra tax that the ACCA bring in and may choose to test for you in your Advanced Taxation paper. So as I say, syllabus area A is all the technical knowledge about how the UK tax system works, i.e. how the main UK taxes work. Now, of course, you do need the knowledge of how the taxes work in the UK, but what we have with syllabus areas B, C and D is what I think makes our Advanced Taxation syllabus exciting and perhaps more challenging and different than your earlier taxation paper. What you'll look at in syllabus areas B, C and D are more skills that you need to show to be a successful student. So if you look at B, identify and evaluate the impact of relevant taxes on various situations and courses of action, including the interaction of taxes. What I think makes this a really interesting paper is that your questions will give you a real-world scenario. Perhaps somebody who's thinking about setting up a business. Perhaps somebody who has received a large inheritance and is thinking about what to do with their money. They'll give you a real-world scenario and they'll expect you to understand the different taxes that will apply to that specific scenario. Now, that's going to be perhaps more challenging than you've seen on your earlier papers because you'll be dealing with what I would call a multi-tax scenario. So, for example, setting up your own business, you'd need to be advising your client, if they were going to be a sole trader, about not just income tax, but also national insurance, and potentially should they be registering for VAT. Now, actually, choosing to set your business up is a really lovely scenario to get you thinking about, because just because we talk about setting up a business, you need to understand that whether that is a sole trade business or partnership, or whether that business is incorporated into a company, has hugely different tax consequences. We're thinking income tax versus corporation tax that we would be talking about. So actually being able to advise our client, the person setting up in their business, as to how the taxes will affect them when setting up their own business, that is a classic style of question we might expect to see in advanced taxation. Now, as well as understanding how the taxes will impact a particular scenario, if we look at Syllabus Area C, we get some advice. And again, I think this is what makes this a really interesting paper for you. We need to advise our client on minimising and or deferring their tax by using standard tax planning measures. So we're not necessarily just saying to our client in the scenario, this is how you will be taxed. We might be explaining to them that a particular relief might be available to reduce or defer when they pay their tax. Another classic example might be you're advising a married couple, and perhaps you're using some standard tax planning by trying to minimise the tax payable by the couple overall. So again, Syllabus Area C then is us providing skills and actually providing advice to our clients about how to reduce the overall tax that they might be paying. In a similar theme, Syllabus Area D is another skill. The ACCA want to check that we can communicate appropriately. So if you look, we've got communicate with clients, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs and other professionals in an appropriate manner. Now, what typically you will find is that one of your Section A questions will ask you to provide some sort of a document that is to be addressed to a client or the taxman or your manager within the tax practice that you work for. It might be a memorandum, it might be an email, it might be a report. But what the ACCA are looking for here is, can you communicate appropriately? Can you use appropriate language? Obviously, if you've got a non-tax trained client, you don't want to use too tax-heavy language when addressing your client. If you're writing a report or a memorandum, typically we would expect to see calculations in an appendix at the back of that report, then referenced into the body of your report. So interestingly, they are looking at whether you have the appropriate communication skills as well as having all that technical tax knowledge for you to be a successful advanced taxation student. Just a final note on the advanced taxation syllabus then. I think this is an absolutely fascinating paper for you to study. Obviously, if you've chosen this paper, then we need you to pass it to be a successful student. But I think more than that, this is going to give you practical expertise in tax. Now, whether that's purely because you want to pass this exam, or whether it's because it's going to give you useful skills for later in your life, obviously only you will know that. But if you work in tax, or if you ever wanted to work in tax in practice, then this paper really tries to put you in some real world scenarios that you might see as a tax advisor. So really helpful if you ever wanted to work in tax. But I think more than that, it also gives you relevant experience and expertise if, for example, you want to go on and set up your own business at some point in the future. Understanding how you'd be taxed, that would be really, really important. And this paper is going to give you the skills and expertise to understand how setting up your own business would work from a tax point of view. Maybe you don't want to go on and set up your own business in the future, but maybe you're going to go on to become a very wealthy, well-paid individual once you've qualified for your ACCA qualification. Well, again, what this paper might let you do is understand how to invest your money tax efficiently. It would advise you on how to save in a pension and how that can be tax efficient. You might receive an inheritance or be worried about inheritance tax due on your death. This paper will give you an understanding of how all of those things would work from a tax point of view. So not just a paper that you need for passing and qualifying as an ACCA member, but I think also a paper that gives you some really, really helpful real-world experience in terms of how tax impacts us all in our everyday lives. In addition to understanding what the Advanced Taxation syllabus looks like, if I'm going to introduce you to this paper, I think the other critical thing that I need to explain to you is what you need to expect in terms of what the Advanced Taxation exam is going to look like. So your exam will be broken into two sections, a section A and a section B. Section A contains two compulsory questions. Question 1 will be 35 marks and question 2 will be 25 marks. So in total, section A is 60% of your examination and therefore very important. Now, these two questions will be scenario-based questions. They will give you a real-world scenario. Typically, one of the questions will be a personal tax scenario, so it will tell you about an individual. Typically, either the individual will be employed or they will be self-employed. And the question will look at that individual and it will ask you to give advice on whatever is happening in that scenario. Maybe it's an individual being made redundant, receiving a redundancy payment, and you advising how that would work from a tax point of view. Potentially that redundancy payment is then being used for the individual to set up their own business, and you're going on and you're advising about the tax consequences of them setting up their own business. I don't know. Maybe the scenario is about an individual who has been a sole trader for a while. They're thinking about, should I incorporate my business? Should my business become a company? Or maybe you've got a sole trader who's been in business for a while and actually wants to retire. And so your scenario is about them retiring and selling their business and ceasing to trade as a sole trader. Now, we don't know whether that personal tax scenario will be question 1 or question 2, but what we would typically expect is that the other question would then focus in on a corporate scenario, because if you think about it, they're going to want to test that you can advise from a both personal and a corporate tax point of view. So certainly historically, we've had one question focus on personal tax and one question focus on corporate tax. Now, in that corporate tax scenario, that doesn't mean that the scenario will be all about corporation tax. What you may have is a standalone company or a group of companies that might test some sort of corporation tax group scenario as well. But do remember that companies will probably also be registered for VAT. So it would be very easy for some VAT to be tested as part of a corporate question. Companies could also have to pay stamp duty. So stamp duty could also be something that would come into this question. And the other thing that the ACCA sometimes like to do is that the company want you to advise and give some personal tax advice to one of their directors. So there's nothing to stop that corporate tax scenario to perhaps have a little bit of personal tax advice for one of the directors included in it as well. Now, the other thing to be aware of within these Section A questions is that they will include 5 marks on some sort of ethics. And this is because the ACCA think it is really important that as a tax advisor, we know how to behave ethically. So there will be some sort of ethical sub-requirement to one of these A questions that will cover 5 marks worth of ethics. And there will also be 4 marks available for you showing that you have professional skills. Now, what we don't know is whether that is 4 marks in one question or whether that is 4 marks spread across the 2 questions, but this will be about us showing that we have appropriate professional skills. Now, that will be about us being able to format our answer as a memorandum, a letter, a report, or an email. So it will be about appropriate layout of a professional document. It will also be about our use of language. Are we using appropriate language for whoever this report or document is addressing? It will be use of structure, use of headings and subheadings to break down our answer, and also appropriate use of numbers in an appendix referenced into the body of our report. So I think it is important that you understand that we have got these 4 professional skills marks available across Section A. Now, we also have to remember that we've got Section B. Section B is 2 further compulsory 20-mark questions, so 40 marks in total for the 2 20-mark questions. These questions tend to be slightly shorter because they're 20 rather than 25 or 35 marks, and they often tend to be broken down into slightly more separate topics. Now, they are still scenario based, but what happens with these questions when you look at them is that there's a brief introductory paragraph at the start of the question that will probably say, I don't know, Fred needs advice on, and then Fred will need advice on 3 things. So then as you read into the question, it will tell you more about the 3 things that Fred needs advice on. And then what you'll have is a requirement A, B and C, which will very clearly break down what you're being asked about each of those 3 topics. And it will break the marks down so that you understand how to allocate your time across each of those 3 sub-requirements. Now, what you find is that these questions tend to be able to get more breadth across your syllabus. So your A questions do tend to focus on a scenario and pull everything together for the one scenario, whereas your B questions, you might find that requirement A, B and C are about almost 3 completely different tax topics as you look at them. This is where I feel you get more breadth across the syllabus and that the examiner is able to choose more separate areas to check that you understand those separate areas. Now, anything else just to mention? It's a 3-hour, 15-minute exam. So obviously we've got 1.95 minutes per mark when we're attempting these questions. And it is really important when you're attempting these questions that you stick to time and you answer each part of each question. So not just setting your 1.95 minutes for the whole question, but breaking it down across the sub-requirements is going to be an important skill that you must have on this paper. What we're looking for is 50% as your pass mark. Now, the best chance you have of doing that is to stick to time across the paper and make sure you attempt each sub-part of each question. I think I've already mentioned that your questions will be scenario based and they will look at multiple taxes in the one question. They want you to exhibit those skills of advice. So there will be planning and there will be interaction of the taxes in these questions. And then the final thing just to mention about this exam is that you will not get a purely numerical question, which perhaps you would have had in your earlier taxation studies. Advanced taxation is about skills and advice. So yes, there will be some calculations or computations, but generally you only need those in support of your written advice, in support of the explanation or the advice that you're giving. So really important that you understand that this is not a purely numerical paper, that you will need to be giving advice and explaining your calculations as well. Hopefully that gives you a taster of what this advanced taxation exam is all about. What remains is for you to dive into the material, have a look at the technical material and start to learn the technical material that you need to be a successful student. Don't forget, as well as learning the technical material, 3 of our 4 syllabus areas were about skills. So you're also going to find that as you go through the course, through practicing exam questions, you need to ensure that you develop the skills as well as the relevant technical knowledge for you to be a successful advanced taxation student. I wish you an enjoyable taxation course. Thank you for your time.